I thought my biggest headache would be paying off the garage I had just built. For months, I worked extra shifts, saved every penny, and finally turned my dusty old driveway into something I could be proud of, a garage that wasn't just for parking my car, but for working on small projects, storing tools, and even having a quiet place to think. It felt like a reward for all my hard work. But little did I know, the simple garage would set off a chain of events that would drag me into a battle I never asked for. It started on a quiet Saturday morning. I was sipping coffee, enjoying the sound of birds in the yard, when suddenly I noticed flashing red and blue lights pulling up in front of my house. My heart sank. Had something happened to a neighbor? Was there an emergency? But then I saw her, Karen, the president of the HOA, standing on the sidewalk with her arms crossed, smirking like she had already won a fight I didn't even know had started. The officers got out of their car and walked straight toward me. One of them said, "Sir, we've received a complaint about an illegal structure on your property." I blinked in disbelief. Illegal structure? You mean my garage? Before I could even finish, Karen jumped in, waving papers in the air. That garage violates community guidelines. He wasn't approved to build it, and it needs to be torn down immediately. I stood frozen for a second. The audacity, arrogance, and the worst part? My house wasn't even part of her HOA. She had no authority here. None, but she said it with such confidence, as if she truly believed she could control everything in sight. I tried to explain to the officers, "I don't even live in her HOA. This garage is on my property, and I have the permits to prove it." But Karen kept talking over me, her voice loud and sharp, like she thought the louder she spoke, the more believable her lies would become. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about a garage. This was about control, about power. Karen couldn't stand the idea that I was outside her reach, and she would do anything to drag me under her rules. And as the officers exchanged confused looks, I knew one thing. This fight was only beginning. The police officers stood in front of my garage, their eyes moving between me and Karen as if they weren't sure who to believe. The taller one, Officer Davis, adjusted his cap and asked to see the paperwork. My hands were steady as I went inside, pulled out the thick folder from my desk, and returned to hand it to him. Inside were my building permits, stamped and signed by the county office. Everything was by the book. Karen scoffed loudly, rolling her eyes as if the very idea of me being organized was offensive. "Don't let him fool you," she said quickly, her voice dripping with disdain. "People like him know how to cheat the system. He probably forged those documents." Her words cut deep, but I didn't let them show on my face. Instead, I looked directly at the officers. "Check them. Call the county if you have to. Everything is legal." "I'm not hiding anything." Officer Davis flipped through the paperwork carefully. His partner, Officer Miller, leaned against the patrol car, clearly tired of Karen's nonstop complaining. After a few moments, Davis finally said, "These look legitimate. I don't see any reason to believe this structure is illegal." For a moment, relief washed over me. Maybe this nightmare was already over? But Karen wasn't about to let go that easily. She stepped forward, waving her own stack of papers, printouts from the HOA handbook, filled with highlighted passages. "This garage violates community standards for aesthetics and setbacks. Section 14 clearly states." "That doesn't apply to me," I cut her off. "I've told you before. My property isn't in your HOA. Your rules don't mean anything here." The smirk on her face faltered for just a second, but she quickly regained it. "Oh, don't play games with me, Michael. Everyone in this neighborhood knows your house should have been under the HOA from the start. Just because of some filing error doesn't mean you get to do whatever you want." That was when I realized how far she was willing to go. She didn't care about rules or laws. She cared about control. In her mind, it wasn't about whether I was part of her HOA, it was about whether she could bend reality to make it seem like I was. The officers exchanged another look, and finally Davis cleared his throat. "Ma'am, unless you have proof that this property is legally under your HOA's jurisdiction, there's nothing more we can do here." Karen's face turned red, her lips pressed tight. She wasn't used to being challenged, not like this. "Fine," she snapped. "But don't think this is the end." We'll see what the county has to say about your little stunt." She turned on her heel and stormed off, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. The officers gave me a small nod before leaving as well, their car pulling away and leaving me standing there in front of the garage that had suddenly become a battlefield. I thought that would be the end of it. That once the police had left, Karen would finally realize she had no power here. But I underestimated her obsession. She didn't see this as a loss. She saw it as a challenge. And challenges were something she lived forth very next morning. I woke up to find a bright yellow notice taped to my front door. In bold red letters it read, "Illegal structure, remove immediately or face fines." At the bottom, it was signed not by any county office, not by any legal authority, but by the HOA board. My blood boiled as I ripped the paper down. She was trying to intimidate me, to scare me into submission. But all it did was fuel my determination. I wasn't going to back down. Later that afternoon, I caught sight of her again. She was standing across the street with two of her HOA board members, pointing at my garage, whispering among themselves. Every time I looked their way, they quickly glanced off, pretending they weren't watching. But I knew what they were doing. They were planning their next move, and sure enough, the move came fast. A week later, I received a certified letter in the mail. Inside was a formal notice from the HOA, claiming that my garage violated their covenants and demanding that I tear it down within 30 days. The letter threatened fines of $250 per day if I didn't comply and hinted at possible legal action. I couldn't believe it. I wasn't part of their HOA. I had never signed their covenants, never agreed to their rules, never paid a single fee to them. And yet here they were, trying to drag me into their web with threats and intimidation. I called the county office immediately, and after a frustrating hour of being transferred from one department to another, I finally got the confirmation I needed. My property was not and had never been under the jurisdiction of the HOA. The county records were crystal clear, but when I presented that information to Karen, she just smirked. "County records can be wrong," she said smugly. "We've already voted. The board has unanimously decided that your property falls under HOA boundaries now." I stared at her in disbelief. "You can't just vote someone into your HOA. That's not how it works," she shrugged. "It's how it works here. And if you don't like it, maybe you should find another neighborhood to live in." Her arrogance was staggering. But it also revealed something important. She wasn't just making this up on her own. She had the full support of her board. They were all in this together, which meant this fight was going to be bigger than I thought. In the weeks that followed, the harassment escalated. I'd come home to find more yellow notices plastered on my garage. Strangers I didn't recognize, likely hired by the HOA, took pictures of my property, jotting down notes like I was under surveillance. Once, I even caught one of them peeking over my fence with a camera. When I confronted him, he quickly ran off, muttering something about evidence. It didn't stop there. One evening, I discovered a letter slipped under my door. It wasn't official, just a typed page with no letterhead. But the message was clear. "Tear down the garage, or we'll make you regret it." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about rules or fines anymore. This was personal. Karen wanted to break me, to show the whole neighborhood that she was the one in charge. No matter what the law said, I started keeping records of everything. Every notice, every letter, every photo I could take of the so-called inspectors she sent. If she wanted a fight, I was going to make sure I had the evidence to defend myself, but evidence alone wasn't going to stop her. Not when she had the HOA board behind her, and not when she was willing to bend every rule to her advantage. The real turning point came 2 weeks later, when I returned home to find yet another police car parked outside my house. My stomach tightened as I pulled into the driveway. This time, Karen wasn't alone. She had 3 HOA members standing with her, and she looked smugger than ever. As I stepped out of my car, one of the officers approached me. "Mr. Turner, we've received reports that your garage may be a safety hazard. We need to inspect it." I could feel my blood pressure rising. Another false report. Another attempt to drag me through the mud. And Karen was standing right there, arms folded, waiting for me to explode so she could act like the victim, but I didn't. Instead, I calmly opened the garage and let the officers look inside. They checked the structure, the wiring, everything. After 20 minutes, they shook their heads. It's safe. Up to code. We don't see any issues here. Karen's face twisted in frustration, but she quickly masked it. Well, then maybe we'll take this to court, she snapped. That was when I realized the battle lines were officially drawn. This wasn't just about notices or letters anymore. This was heading towards something much bigger, something that could decide not just the fate of my garage, but the very principle of whether a homeowner had the right to live free from HOA control. And as I watched Karen march away with her board members, whispering furiously among themselves, I knew this was only the beginning. I remember standing there in my driveway that night, the echo of Karen's sharp words still ringing in my ears. The police had left, shaking their heads at the absurdity of it all, but Karen and her board members were already plotting their next move. I could see it in their whispers, the way they huddled together, and the smug look on her face that screamed, "This isn't over," and she was right. The next few days felt like living under a microscope. Every time I stepped outside, I caught someone watching me. Sometimes it was Karen herself. Other times it was one of her loyal board members. They'd stroll past my house slowly, their phones out, pretending to check messages but clearly snapping photos of my garage. I even saw Karen once, standing at the end of my street with binoculars in hand, as if she were on some kind of neighborhood stackout. It would have been laughable if it weren't so invasive at first. I tried to brush it off. I focused on my work, my family, and my daily life. But the more I ignored them, the bolder they got. Notices taped to my door, letters slipped into my mailbox, strangers asking me about my garage as if they'd been fed a script. It wasn't just about the structure anymore, it was about painting me as a villain, someone who refused to play by the rules. One evening, I sat at my kitchen table with all the paperwork spread out in front of me. County permits, property maps, the HOA handbook that didn't apply to me. I had everything I needed to prove I was in the right. But no matter how much evidence I had, Karen didn't care. She wasn't fighting for facts. She was fighting for power, and that's when it hit me. This wasn't going to end with paperwork. I looked out my window that night and saw her porch light glowing across the street. She was outside, laughing with two of her board members, pointing in my direction as if I were some kind of joke. That's when a thought settled into my mind, heavier than any letter she could ever tape to my door. She won't stop until she wins. Or until I make her lose so badly she can't come back from it. The real war hadn't even started yet. The next morning, I woke to the sound of construction equipment. For a moment I panicked, thinking Karen had somehow brought workers to tear down my garage. But no, it was her house. She had hired a crew to repaint her siding, landscape her yard, and upgrade her porch. It was all a show. She wanted the entire neighborhood to see her as the one who set the standard, the queen of the block. And in her twisted mind, my garage was the one stain ruining her perfect community. As I sipped my coffee, watching the workers buzz around her house, I realized something else. Karen was preparing for a bigger move. The letters, the notices, the police calls, they were all just warm-ups. She was saving her real strike for when she thought I was weakest, but I wasn't going to wait around for her to strike that night. I pulled out my phone and started making calls. To the county office. To a lawyer friend I knew from college. To anyone who could give me advice on how to handle an HOA that had no legal authority but acted like it ruled the world. If Karen wanted a war, then I needed to be ready for battle. Little did I know, she was already 3 steps ahead, because while I was gathering my defense, she was preparing to bring the fight to my doorstep, in a way that would shake the entire neighborhood and drag me deeper into chaos than I ever thought possible. The following week was when everything exploded. It started with a notice, bright orange, stapled right to my garage door. The bold black letters at the top screamed, "Unauthorized structure, remove immediately." At first I laughed. It was so ridiculous, so over the top, that I couldn't believe Karen actually had the nerve to post something like that on property that wasn't even under her HOA. But when I peeled it off and read the fine print, my laughter vanished. The notice claimed that if I didn't demolish my garage within 10 days, the HOA would take legal action and seek recovery of all fines and penalties owed. Fines? Penalties? I knew it was all fake. I knew they had no legal power. But to the average neighbor who saw that notice, it looked official. It looked like I was the one breaking the law. And that was Karen's strategy if she couldn't win in court. She'd win in the court of public opinion that night. I noticed the shiftay neighbor I'd always exchanged friendly waves with refused to look me in the eye. Another crossed the street instead of walking past my house. By the weekend, whispers followed me every time I mowed my lawn or unloaded groceries from my car. Karen was poisoning the neighborhood against me. And then came the petition one Saturday morning. I stepped outside to grab the mail and saw a group of neighbors huddled near Karen's driveway. She was holding a clipboard, moving from person to person, smiling sweetly as she handed them a pen. I walked over, curious, and the moment she saw me, her smile turned sharp. "Oh, look who's here," Karen announced loudly, making sure the entire group heard. "Michael, we're just collecting signatures to restore order to our neighborhood. You understand, don't you?" She held the clipboard out like it was a weapon. I glanced at it and felt my stomach twist. Petition to remove unauthorized garage at 114 Maple Drive. My address. My garage. I looked up at her, fury simmering in my chest. "You know this petition is worthless. I'm not in your HOA. You don't have jurisdiction." Karen tilted her head, her sunglasses reflecting the morning sun. "Maybe not. But when the entire neighborhood agrees that your structure is illegal, what do you think the county will say? What do you think buyers will think when you eventually try to sell this?" "Sir?" Her little crowd chuckled softly. Nodding in agreement, that was when I realized the true danger. Karen wasn't just after my garage. She was after my reputation, my standing in the community. If she could turn everyone against me, she could make my life unbearable. Whether or not she had the law on her side, I clenched my fists but forced myself to walk away. Losing my temper in front of her audience would have been exactly what she wanted, but inside, I was boiling. The escalation came faster than I could keep up with. First, there were anonymous complaints filed to the county inspector. I'd come home to find yellow tags stuck on my door, each one demanding inspections for code violations. They never amounted to anything. My permits were all valid, but each time I had to take time off work to meet an inspector, explain the situation, and watch them roll their eyes at the obvious harassment. Then came the vandalism one morning. I woke to find spray paint scrawled across the side of my garage, illegal, in dripping red letters. My heart sank, and for the first time, I felt a real sense of violation. This wasn't just HOA politics anymore. Someone had trespassed onto my property in the dead of night to send a message when I reported it to the police. They took photos and filed a report, but I could tell from their tone that they didn't expect to catch anyone. "Probably some neighborhood kids," the officer muttered. Though we both knew better, Karen denied everything, of course. In fact, the very next day, she showed up at my door with that infuriating smirk. "Oh dear," she said, feigning innocence as she glanced at the fresh paint stains on my garage. "It's such a shame when property values drop because of unsightly structures." I wanted to slam the door in her face. Instead, I held her gaze and said, "Keep pushing. Karen, you'll regret it." For the first time, I saw a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. Just a flicker. But it was enough to remind me bullies always crumble when you stand tall. The real breaking point came 2 weeks later. I had just finished mowing my lawn when 2 police cruisers pulled up in front of my house. My heart skipped a beat. What now? 2 officers stepped out, hands resting casually on their belts. One of them, a tall man with a calm voice, approached me. "Are you Michael Turner?" "Yes," I said cautiously. "We received a call about illegal construction and possible zoning violations on this property. Mind if we take a look?" "Karen," it had to be Karen. I sighed and motioned toward the garage. "Go ahead. Everything's permitted. I have the paperwork inside if you need to see it." The officers walked around, took a few notes, and within minutes confirmed what I already knew. "Looks fine to us," the taller one said. "Sorry to bother you, sir. Just doing our job." As they were leaving, Karen appeared on her porch, arms crossed, watching smugly. She had actually called the cops on me again. And even though I had been cleared, she looked victorious. Like the very act of dragging the police into it was a win for her. That's when I snapped. I walked across the street, paperwork in hand, and stood at the edge of her driveway. "Karen," I said loudly, so her little group of loyal followers could hear, "this is harassment. I have the legal deed, the permits, and the county's approval. If you don't stop, the next call to the police won't be from you. It'll be from me. And it'll be about you." For a moment, the air went still. Her face twitched, the smirk faltering. But then she recovered, chuckling softly. "Oh, Michael," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "We'll see who the real law is around here." And with that, she turned and walked inside, slamming her door. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the events over and over, thinking about how far this had gone. From petty notices to police involvement to vandalism, it was spiraling out of control. But then I remembered something my lawyer friend had said over the phone. HOAs thrive on intimidation. The only way to beat them is to hit them where it hurts legally and publicly. So I made a decision. I gathered every notice, every letter, every fake petition, every photo of vandalism. I made copies of my deed and permits, and I began preparing a case not just to defend myself, but to expose Karen and her entire HOA for what they were, frauds. Little did I know, the moment I decided to fight back was the moment the battle shifted into a full-blown war. Because Karen wasn't about to let me win quietly. She had one last card to play, and it was her most dangerous move yet, and when she played it, the entire neighborhood would be forced to take sides. The day Karen played her final card started like any other. The sun was out, the street was quiet, and for a moment I almost felt like things had calmed down. But that peace shattered just after noon, when I heard the sound of heavy trucks outside. I stepped out and froze. 2 tow trucks were parked in front of my garage, their engines rumbling. Behind them stood Karen, clipboard in hand, her lawyer Tom at her side, and a small crowd of curious neighbors gathering to watch. "What is this?" I shouted, marching down my driveway. Karen smirked. "Michael Turner, your time is up. This illegal structure is being removed today. By force, if necessary." I laughed in disbelief. "You're out of your mind. This is my property. You have no authority here." Tom adjusted his tie and stepped forward smoothly. "Actually, Michael, according to community bylaws don't apply to me." I snapped, cutting him off. "I'm not part of your HOA. You know it, I know it, and the county knows it. You're trespassing." The tow truck drivers looked uneasy, glancing between us. "Ma'am," one of them said to Karen, "we were told this was an authorized removal." "If it's not, it is authorized," Karen barked, her face red. "You'll be paid handsomely. Just do your job." That was when I pulled out my phone and hit record. "Everyone listen carefully," I said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "This is criminal trespassing and attempted destruction of private property. I have permits. I have legal ownership. If you touch one brick of this garage, I'll have you arrested." The drivers immediately shut off their engines. One muttered, "I'm not getting sued for this," before climbing back into his truck. Karen's face twisted. She turned to her lawyer, whispering furiously, but before they could regroup, flashing lights appeared again. Police cars. This time it wasn't Karen who called them. It was me. When the officers arrived, I handed them my thick folder of documents. Deeds, permits, inspection approvals, everything neatly organized. One officer looked through the pages, nodding slowly, then Karen shoved her papers forward. "Officer, don't let him fool you. This garage is a violation. It ruins property values. The HOA has the right to demand its removal." The officer raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, we've already been out here before. This house is not in your HOA. You don't have jurisdiction." Karen's jaw dropped. But look at the signatures." "The neighbors' petitions don't override county law," the officer said flatly. "And if you keep harassing this man, you could be facing charges." Her smug confidence shattered right there on the pavement. For the first time since this war began, Karen looked. Small cornereth crowd of neighbors, who had been whispering and waiting for a spectacle, started shifting uncomfortably. Some even muttered under their breath, realizing how far Karen had gone. But Karen wasn't finished. She pointed at me, her voice shaking with rage. "He's lying. He forged those permits. He doesn't belong here." That was when I played my final card. He reached into my folder and pulled out a stamped letter from the county clerk, dated just 3 days earlier. It confirmed my deed, my zoning compliance, and every permit tied to my garage. I held it up for everyone to see. "This," I said firmly, "is the law." Not her word. Not her fake papers. The officer took the letter, read it carefully, then handed it back. Mr. Turner is within his rights. Ma'am, you and your HOA have no legal authority here. If you continue, you'll be arrested for harassment and trespassing. Silence fell over the street. Karen's face turned pale, her hands trembling as she tried to think of anything to say. But the officers weren't waiting for her excuses. Ma'am, it's time to leave, the taller officer said. Sternly, Karen's lawyer tugged at her arm, whispering urgently. She resisted for a second, then finally spun on her heel. Storming back to her house with Tom scrambling after her, the tow trucks rolled away, and the neighbors slowly dispersed, some avoiding my eyes, others giving me small nods of respect. I stood there in my driveway, my garage behind me, the weight of weeks of stress lifting off my shoulders for the first time. It felt like I had truly won, but deep down, I knew Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. And that thought lingered as I locked up my garage that night, because even when you win against someone like her, the battle never really ends. The morning after the tow truck fiasco, I stood in front of my garage with a cup of coffee, staring at the sunlight reflecting off the fresh coat of paint. It wasn't just a garage anymore. It was a symbol, a reminder that this land, this home, and every brick of it was mine, and no one, not even Karen and her crooked lawyer, could take that from me. For weeks, my life had been chaotic. Constant threats, sleepless nights, and the anxiety of not knowing what trick the HOA would pull next. But that morning, for the first time, I felt peace. The silence of the street was different now. It wasn't filled with the tension of watching eyes and hushed whispers. Instead, it felt respectful. Neighbors who had once avoided me now waved when they walked by. Some even stopped to chat. One older man from across the street, Mr. Jenkins, came over with his golden retriever. Michael, he said with a warm smile, I just wanted to say, good job standing your ground. Most of us never had the guts to do what you did, I chuckled, scratching the dog behind the ears. Honestly, I didn't feel brave most of the time. I just knew if I didn't fight, I'd lose everything. He nodded. That's the thing. People like Karen, they thrive when we stay quiet. But you showed everyone that she can be stopped. You didn't just win for yourself, you won for the whole neighborhood. His words hit me harder than I expected. Because he was right. It wasn't just about the garage anymore. Karen had been running this place like her own little kingdom, using fear and intimidation to control people. By standing up to her, I hadn't just protected my home, I had broken her grip on the community. Later that week, I got a call from the county clerk's office. They informed me that Karen's repeated false filings, forged documents, and harassment had triggered an official investigation. Within days, rumors spread that the HOA board had called an emergency meeting. Karen had been suspended as president pending the outcome. When I heard the news, I couldn't help but laugh. After all the stress, all the shouting matches, all the sleepless nights, the very organization she used to attack me had finally turned on her. Karma had a funny way of working itself out, but it wasn't just the HO. Some of the same neighbors who had once signed her petition against my garage showed up at my door. They brought pies, bottles of wine, and even simple apologies. Michael, one woman said nervously, we're sorry. Karen told us lies and we believed her. But after what happened with the police, we realized she was the problem, not you. I accepted their apologies. I could have stayed bitter, but honestly, holding on to anger wasn't worth it. What mattered was that the truth had come out, and people had finally seen Karen for who she really was. My lawyer, Mia, also called me that week. Michael, she said, her tone light for the first time in months, we've got everything we need. Between the harassment, the forged documents, and the attempted destruction of your property, you have an airtight case. We can push this in court and make sure it never happens again. Hearing that felt like the final nail in the coffin. Not only had I stopped Karen in the moment, but now I had the chance to make it permanent, to ensure she and her HOA cronies never tried something like this on me, or anyone else ever again. As the weeks turned into months, the tension in the neighborhood slowly dissolved. The garage became my sanctuary. On weekends, I'd work on my car, build shelves, or just sit inside with the radio playing while I sipped a cold drink. It wasn't just four walls and a roof. It was proof that I could fight back and win one evening, As the sun set over the street, I sat on the driveway watching kids ride their bikes up and down the block. Their laughter echoed through the air, and for the first time, I realized something important. This place, this neighborhood, it could be good again. Without Karen pulling the strings, people were free to breathe, to live without fear of ridiculous fines or constant surveillance. And as for Karen, word spread that she'd been stripped of her HOA presidency. Some said she tried to fight it in court. Others said she moved away quietly in shame. I didn't care either way. She was gone. That was enough. One night, as I closed the garage door, I thought back to the very first time she showed up, screaming about how my garage was illegal. At the time, I thought it was the beginning of a nightmare. But standing there now, I realized it had been the start of something else, a battle that taught me strength. I didn't know I had a victory that changed not just my life, but my entire neighborhood. The fight was over. The garage was mine. And no matter what, I knew one thing for sure. I would never let anyone, HOA or otherwise, dictate how I lived on my own land again. Now, I ask a question for you. What do you think? Was Karen truly convinced that she was in the right? Or was she just using the HOA to fuel her obsession with control? If you were in my shoes, would you have fought her the way I did, or just given up to keep the peace? And most importantly, do you think Karen actually learnt her lesson after being exposed? Or is she just waiting to cause trouble somewhere else? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget, your opinion might be the one that sparks the next big discussion about HOAs and power gone too far. So what's your take on HOA Karen's downfall?
This was just one story, but the next one will be even more dramatic. Are you ready? Then you need to subscribe to HOA Stories 87 right now. Like this video, share it with your friends, and hit the bell because the next story might sound a little too close to home.